Please turn in your Bibles today to the book of Matthew, chapter 6, and place a marker in both 1 Timothy chapter 6 and Luke chapter 12. Matthew 6, 1 Timothy 6, Luke chapter 12. Today when I read, I'm going to be reading from the New International Version as we continue our series this morning called Spiritual Money Matters. And in this series, we're looking at our finances not purely from a practical standpoint, but more from a spiritual one. Now, if you've been with us the last couple of weeks, you'll remember that we started this series with a message entitled Threading the Needle. In this message, we talked about a passage where Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And I shared with you that week that Jesus does not have a problem with wealth. Now, some of you may have heard differently. Some of you may have heard that Jesus said that money is the root of all evil. But today I'm here to remind you that that is not what Jesus said. What Jesus said was that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. In other words, loving money or greed is one of the roots of evil. Jesus didn't have a problem with wealth. He had a problem with greed. His problem is with caring more about the balance of your bank account or the number of things that you own than you care about the people around you and their well-being, or than you care about your relationship with our Creator. That's what Jesus' statement about a camel going through the eye of a needle was all about, and that's what we learned in our first message. And then last week, we had a message entitled Trust Fall, where we explored what it really looks like to trust God with our finances. We looked at the man in Jesus' parable from Luke chapter 12 that had an awesome crop yield. It was so much that his barns wouldn't hold it all, so he thought about his predicament, and then he finally decided, you know what, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones so that I can hold all of the crops that I've managed to accumulate. Then the man said to himself, hey, you've got plenty of wealth to last you for many years. Let's take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But Jesus said that God called this man a fool. Not because he was rich, but because he trusted in those riches rather than the one who gave them. We learned last week that there are dangers in trusting in anyone or anything other than God for your provision. The first danger we talked about is that it can make you confident in things that are fleeting. Imagine that this man had torn down his barns, built the bigger barns, filled them with all the crops, and then lost it all in a fire or a storm. His entire world would have been shaken because that's where his trust was placed. We see that happen to people in our lives all the time where they experience a financially devastating event, and it just destroys them because their trust is in themselves and their finances rather than in the Lord. The second danger that we talked about is that it can make you worried about all the potential pitfalls that life may throw at you. Listen, some of you probably still live in this world. You still live in this mindset. And I want to encourage you to try to live your life like Jesus instructed us to, not worrying about your provision. He says, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear, because God knows that you need these things. And then finally, last week, we talked about how trusting in anyone or anything other than God robs you of the opportunity to see Him work a miracle. Church, I love in my life when I get to sit back and watch God show off. Does anyone ever had this happen in your life? Have you ever sat back and watched God just show off and provide in a miraculous way? I love doing that, but the only way that happens is when we trust in Him. So far in this series, we've learned not to be greedy, and we've learned to put our trust only in God. Today, we're going to continue our conversation about money. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, all this preacher ever does is talk about money. The title of today's message is Long-Term Investing. Church, let me ask you something. Have you ever been told that you need to invest for your future? If anyone's ever told you that or taught you that, raise your hand. You need to invest in, maybe it was a parent or a grandparent who sat you down and said, you've got to start saving early. Maybe it was a boss or a financial advisor that encouraged you to put the maximum amount into your 401k or to open up an IRA or some other acronym. Maybe it was a YouTube influencer who was teaching you how to flip houses or telling you needed to buy crypto or showing you how to turn $100 into $100,000 in 3 weeks. Whatever it was in your life, I think that somewhere along the way, most of us have probably gotten this message. If you want to be secure in your future, you need to be smart with your money today. I talked about my grandfather earlier. He used to have a saying. He got on to me all the time when I was a young man because, well, Christine and I weren't always the smartest with money. We're still not always the smartest with money, but he'd say, Brian, I'm telling you, don't invest in rolling stock. He's saying, don't put all your money into cars that you can't afford, build for the future, save for the future. We've all gotten that message. If you want to be secure in the future, you need to be smart with your money today. And listen, there is some truth in that. We do need to be wise in our financial decisions. We do need to be good stewards of what the Lord has blessed us with. And it certainly doesn't hurt to plan ahead, as long as you don't put your trust in that plan. But today I want to challenge you with a different kind of investment advice. I want to tell you how to build real wealth for the future, straight from Jesus himself. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus is teaching a crowd of people in what we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. And he's just wrapped up the portion of his teaching where he teaches us how we should pray. And then in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, this is what Jesus said. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In this passage, Jesus teaches us a profound lesson about investing for the future. And today I want to point out to you 3 things that if we can truly learn them, will completely change our world. The first thing that we need to learn today is that earthly treasure is fleeting. Jesus begins his financial teaching here with a clear instruction. Do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth. Don't build treasure on earth. Listen, church, if you want to talk about the church being countercultural, if we just follow this one command of Jesus's, that would be countercultural. Because this goes against every piece of financial advice that we've ever been given. Even Dave Ramsey, the world's foremost Christian financial advisor, spends a lot of airtime telling people how they can get out of debt. For what reason? So that they can be wealthy. So that they can be rich. He says, live like no one else now so you can live like no one else later. And he talks about being able to buy big houses and fancy cars and all the things you can do with money. Now listen, to be fair, Dave Ramsey does talk about giving. Sometimes he'll say, live like no one else so that you can give like no one else. And I believe that Dave Ramsey's a very generous person, but that doesn't change the fact that Jesus' instruction in Matthew chapter 6 goes entirely against this portion of Dave Ramsey's philosophy of building wealth. And not just Dave Ramsey's, Jesus' advice goes against what Morgan Stanley and Dean Witter and Edward Jones and every other financial guru has ever taught us. It goes against what our grandparents and our parents taught us. It even goes against what I constantly try to teach my children. Courtney could tell you, if I gave her the microphone, how many times I have sat down and told her, listen, you got to be putting into your 401k. You got to put the maximum amount that they'll let you in. And then if that's 6% this year, next year change it to 7%. Then the next year change it to 8% and just bump it up until you get to 15%. I tell her that all the time. She doesn't listen. Neither does her brother. I'm hoping that when she gets married, maybe Eric will listen to me. Maybe I can exert enough influence on him that she'll change her activities. But Jesus' instruction goes against that. He says, do not store up treasures here on earth. Now listen, church, I don't want you to go home today and log in and pull everything you have out of your 401k and go tomorrow and buy a big bass boat or a fancy car or anything like that. That's not what this is about. That's not what I'm telling you. It's not the point. And to be fair, Jesus never told us not to save for the future. In fact, there are scriptures that tell us to do that. There are scriptures that talk about counting the cost. But he did tell us not to store up treasure. And when he did, I believe that what he's referring to here is not saving for what you know you're going to inevitably need when your body's not able to work anymore. I believe he's talking about building up extra, building up massive wealth. Anybody ever heard of a man named Warren Buffett? Warren Buffett, they call him the Oracle of Omaha. He owns a company called Berkshire Hathaway, and that company owns so many other companies that you probably are familiar with. One of them is Dairy Queen, Geico Insurance, NetJets. I mean, there's a ton of them. He's one of the, I think right now, he's the fifth wealthiest person in the whole world. Like, I'm talking billions and billions of dollars. I think every day he gets hundreds of millions of dollars of interest. And, you know, he's a benevolent person. He's made the decision that when he dies, he has named a council, and they've been instructed to give away 98% of his wealth through philanthropic ventures. But why wait? I wonder that about him. So like, why build up that wealth and then have him give it away after you leave? Why not do something good with it now? I think that's the type of behavior that Jesus is talking about when he tells us not to store up our treasures in heaven. Now, most of you don't have hundreds of billions of dollars, but some of you probably are storing up some treasure, extra stuff that you don't need. Now, listen, it's important that we look at Jesus' statement in its entirety. He doesn't just say don't store up treasure on earth. He says don't store up treasure here on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Why aren't we supposed to store up treasures on earth? Because they don't last. Because they're fleeting. Jesus says that when we store up treasure on earth, the possibility exists that moths will eat it, that vermin will destroy it, or that thieves will steal it. That's the nature of earthly treasure. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Earthly treasure is not secure. Now listen, I know some of you who were here last week are probably thinking, didn't we cover this last week? When you told us not to put our trust in anything other than God? Yes, we did. But listen, I'll be honest with you, it probably bears repeating this week and next week and every week from here until the end of time. Because I don't know about you, church, but in my life, sometimes I'll see something shiny and I'll forget what I know. Am I the only one? Man, y'all looking at me like I'm crazy. Am I the only one that says, you know what, I'm going to do what the Lord says. I'm not going to store up treasures on earth, and I'm not going to put my trust in those treasures, and I'm going to live and give. And then I see something shiny, and I'm like a fish chasing after those spinnerbait. Oh, I want that. I want that. Christina can tell you, every day it's something different that I want. She won't because she's a good woman. Stop nodding your head, dear. Jesus teaches us not to store up treasure for ourselves on earth because earthly treasure is fleeting. So what is a person to do? Well, I'm glad you asked. The second thing that we need to learn today is that heavenly treasure is eternal. Heavenly treasure lasts forever. In contrast to our worldly riches, Jesus instructs us to store up treasure in heaven. He says, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Jesus says there's a better way. There's a better way to live. There's a better way to invest. He says that when we store our treasure in heaven, it never wears out. It never loses value, and it never disappears. Now listen, we got some pretty smart people in the room. So I want to ask you a question. If you have a bunch of stuff that you need to store, and I tell you, you know what? There's 2 places here in Lowell where you can store that stuff. I want to tell you about them. Now, one of them, it's a place. It's a place that will let you put your stuff. But you know what? There's been a lot of people that have had their stuff there, and their stuff has gotten destroyed by insects or rodents. There's a lot of Google reviews about that place that say that people put their stuff there and it got stolen. Now there's this other place though, option B. Man, that place is nice. In fact, it's nicer than your house. If you had a chance, you ought to try and just live there. This place has 5-star reviews all the way across the board. No one has ever had anything damaged or destroyed there. No one has ever had anything stolen. Church, which one would you choose? You choose option B, right? I think everyone would pretty much choose option B. And that's why Jesus instructs us in the way that he does. That's why he paints this picture for us. Because he knows it's an obvious choice. So why in the world would we not go that route? Well, for some people, it's because they don't know how to store up their treasure in heaven. You know, it's not like you can run down to the bank of heaven and make a deposit, is it? It's not that easy. It's not like you can log on and make a wire transfer, move your money into the heavenly account. So how do you do that? Well, thankfully, Jesus taught us. And he's not the only one. Paul did too. Turn in your Bibles to 1 Timothy chapter 6. We're going to look at verses 17 through 19. I think we've read this passage pretty much every week for the past couple of weeks, but it's very applicable to what we're talking about, so I think we should read it again. Starting in verse 17 of 1 Timothy chapter 6, this is what Paul writes. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. In verse 18, he says this, command them to do good. Look at your neighbor and say, do good. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. And then he says in verse 19, in this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Paul says, do good. Be rich in good deeds. Be generous and willing to share. And in this way, you will store treasure for the coming age. Church, the way that we store up treasure in heaven is by using the things that God blesses us with to serve other people, to help other people, to minister to other people. This is a principle that Jesus often taught on. You may remember when we started this series, we looked at Matthew chapter 19, and we read a story about a rich young man who came to Jesus. And this rich young man came to Jesus and he asked him, how do I inherit eternal life? In other words, how do I get into heaven? Jesus told him, follow the commandments. Well, the man said, which ones? Which commandments is it that I'm supposed to follow? And Jesus said to him, he listed a few of the commandments. He said, honor your father and mother, and a few more. I don't even remember which ones off the top of my head, but he don't steal, don't murder, don't lie. And the man said, listen, I've done all these things since I was a child. What am I still lacking? Jesus said, listen. In fact, I'm going to read it to you. Matthew 19:21, he said this. If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor. He says, and then you will have treasure in heaven. He says, then come follow me. Sell what you own and give to the poor. Church, that's a hard commandment. The Bible tells us that the rich man went away sad because he had many things. I wonder how many of you, if I told you today that the Lord had spoken to me and he had told me that what you need to do is go home, sell everything you own, give the money to the poor, and you'll get into heaven. How many people would just go away sad? Listen, I'm talking to myself there. That'd be rough, wouldn't it? The Lord's been dealing with me as I've been studying for this and preparing for this. And I'm like, man, you know what? I need to just start in the shed or the garage, the stuff that I haven't touched in 5 or 6 years. I probably need to sell that and give to the poor. Some of y'all are like, Pastor, don't talk to me like that. I don't want to do that. Jesus told the man to sell your possessions, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Move your treasure from here to heaven by giving to the poor. That's what Jesus said, his words. And then Paul tells Timothy that by doing this, we lay a firm foundation for the coming age. Church, I don't know about you, but I want my mansion in heaven to have a firm foundation. I don't want any foundation problems. When we do, church, that is long-term investing. That is investing for the future. That's heaven's portfolio plan. Don't store up your wealth here on earth where it can be damaged, destroyed, or stolen. Use what you have to do good. Use what you have to help people, and in doing so, convert it to heavenly treasure. That's how you build treasure that lasts, not just for retirement, but for eternity. For eternity. And that's a hard concept to grasp, isn't it? Eternity. I think that's one point that people don't take into account when they're weighing their options. You know, maybe this morning when I'm talking about how fleeting our worldly, earthly treasures are, maybe you're thinking, listen, I ain't got to worry about that, Pastor. I'm well insured. If the insects or the rodents get to my stuff, if I lose it in a fire or a tornado, if somebody steals from me, I ain't got to worry about it. Maybe you keep your money in that new bank in Rogers that's called Armor Bank. Have you driven by that? We drove by it yesterday. Christine said, that's a nice bank. But they have a shield as their logo, Armor Bank. They're going to keep your money safe. They're going to protect it. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're like, listen, I don't think I have to worry about things fleeting, Pastor. I've got enough to last, and I've got it in a safe place. Well, let's ignore for a moment whether or not that's going to happen, and let's think about how long your earthly treasure will last. Let's assume that you are going to live for a really, really long time, like longer than Ivan has lived already. Yeah. Let's assume that you're going to live to the ripe old age of 106. How does 106 years of having treasure compare to eternity? How does that compare to forever? 106 years is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. And I'm not going to tell you that I know how this heavenly treasure thing is going to work. I do not know. I don't know if we're going to have different sized mansions when we get to heaven. Or I don't know if maybe some of us are going to have more crowns or more jewels in our crowns when we get to heaven. I don't know if there's going to be badges that talk about how much treasure you have. I don't know, neither do you. We can fathom it. But what I do know is this: Jesus told us that storing our treasure in heaven is a good thing. So if he said it's a good thing, I think it's probably worth doing. That's a general principle I live my life by. If Jesus was in favor of it, I should be too. See, one thing I know for sure is that it is important where you decide to store your treasure. In fact, that's the third thing that we need to learn this morning. The location of your treasure matters. We already talked about earthly treasure is fleeting. Heavenly treasure is eternal. Today I want you to know the location of your treasure matters. Jesus said, don't store up treasure for yourself on earth. Instead, store up treasure in heaven. And then in verse 21, he says this: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This isn't the only time Jesus said this. Turn to Luke chapter 12. In Luke chapter 12, when Jesus gets through telling the story of Bigger Barn Bob, he goes on to tell us not to worry about our provision. He says, don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink, what you're going to wear. He says, he talks about birds and flowers and all kinds of stuff. Jesus is really good at painting word pictures. You can go read it for yourself. We don't have time for that today. But Jesus tells us to seek God and let him handle all the rest of that. And then this is what he says in verses 33 and 34 of Luke chapter 12. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? Sell your possessions and give to the poor. And Jesus says, provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. So Jesus doubles down on what he's already taught, right? And he says this: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's a verse 34, that often gets misunderstood. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I have heard people say that what this means is that you will put your money towards the things that you love. In other words, if you love God, you'll be giving to the church. If you love helping people, that you will give a lot to charity. If you love food, can I get a witness? Then you'll spend a lot of money on food. If you love travel, then you'll spend a lot of money on travel. I've heard people say that that's what this scripture means, is that you will put your money towards the things that you love. I've even heard some people say, show me your bank statement and I'll show you what you care about. Now listen, that's not entirely untrue. It's not. If you look at my bank account, you will learn that I love food and I love travel. You thought I was talking about you. I was talking about myself the whole time. The other thing you'll learn is that I love Blueberry. My expenses have gone way up for the past 6 months. Every time I'm in the store, well, Blueberry needs that. I need to get him that. I'm building up treasure for him. He don't even know how to use it yet. So that's not entirely untrue. You will put your money towards the things that you love, but that's not what Jesus said, and that's not what Jesus was talking about. What Jesus said is, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Jesus didn't say that your heart will chase, that your treasure will chase your heart. He said your heart will chase your treasure. Wherever you put your treasure, church, wherever you put your money and your time and your energy and your focus and your effort, that's where your heart is going to end up. not the other way around. If your treasure, if what you value most in your life is your house, your career, your business, or your savings account, then your heart will be wrapped up in this world. But if your treasure, if what you value most is invested in the things of God, in His people, in His mission, and in His kingdom, then your heart's going to be drawn toward Him, toward heavenly things. Now let me ask you something. I want you to really think about this. Can you imagine getting to the end of your life? You're laying on your deathbed and you know it's coming. The doctors have told you there's nothing left they can do. You've lived a long life. You're happy. You're content. Your family's safe. You're laying there at the end of your life. Can you imagine being there and being so wrapped up in the treasure that you've built in this world that you'd rather stay here than go on to be with the Lord? You're like, that's crazy. Nobody would do that. No, there's not a person. There's not a person that if you ask them. Listen, at the end of today, you can either be here with all of the wealth that you've accumulated, with all of your treasure, or you can be in heaven with God. Surely nobody would choose to stay here. Sounds crazy. But so many people live their lives that way, don't they? Spending every day focused on building their personal kingdom. Spending every day focused on building their bank account, their reputation, their success, ignoring eternal things, neglecting the people around them, pushing God's calling off to the side. See, we can't imagine, most of us, that we would ever choose this world, this terrible, broken world, over the next. But Jesus warns us that where your treasure is, your heart's going to follow. Jesus tells us if you put your treasure here, then you're going to want to stay here. You're going to love this place. Church, today I wonder, where's your treasure? I'm going to ask everyone in the room to bow your head and close your eyes. I'll tell you what, I don't care what anybody says. That's a good word. That's a good word. I always know that if I get convicted writing a sermon, that probably it's going to hit some other folks too. Because birds of a feather flock together. And listen, I want to be transparent with you, church. The Lord's dealing with me. I mean, I spend a lot of time. Listen, I serve the Lord and I love the Lord and I help people and I serve people. But I also spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get more money, how to buy more things, how I can move one thing around and do another thing and build up wealth. I think part of it comes from the fact that, man, I was poor when I was a teenager. My parents got divorced. My mom moved us here to Northwest Arkansas from Tulsa. And we were poor. I mean, there were lots of times I came home from school and we didn't have electricity or we didn't have power because the bill hadn't been paid. I was on a first name basis with the repo man that would come and get our washer and dryer when that bill didn't get paid. I'll never forget. One day I sat and watched Andy Griffith on the television while that man, he was an Indian, a Native American, and he wore these big gold watches and rings. He sat and watched Andy Griffith with me while we waited for my clothes to finish washing so that I could have clean clothes. Church, we were poor. And I think maybe that's part of the reason that I that I am the way I am. But it's so wrong. It's so wrong. I don't want to be focused on this world. I don't want my treasure to be here. I want it to be in heaven. So if you start seeing me sell stuff on Facebook, it's not because we're struggling. I just want you to know it's because I feel like I'm supposed to just start getting rid of some stuff and doing what Jesus told me to do. Today, I wonder if there's anyone else who's here and you're like me. You're like, you know what? Pastor, I never really thought about it before, but I do spend a lot of time looking at my bank account. I spend a lot of time looking at my retirement fund. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get more money and build more wealth. I'm jealous of other people and when the Lord blesses them or when they get rich because of how they're behaving in the world. My focus, my treasure is wrapped up here. It's not wrapped up in heaven. My treasure, I'm not focused on giving to the poor. If that's you, and you say this morning, I need God to change my heart. I need Him to help me convert my treasure to heaven. If that's you, just lift your hand up right where you're at. Who else? Lord, I love you. You know I do. And I want to do right. I want to be the man that you've called me to be. Lord, you see those who've lifted their hands today and said, man, I need to change. I need to change. Lord, I pray that you'll help us, that you will do some open heart surgery, God. That you'll get in there and you'll clean out what doesn't need to be there, that you will shift our focus. You will shift our desire of where we want to build up our treasure. And Lord, you'll help us to begin to make decisions that are aligned with your word, with your Son's instructions on where to store our treasure. Lord, I praise you today. I thank you for this word. I thank you for challenging our hearts and our minds, for changing us, God. Lord, I pray that you will protect us as we leave here and the enemy starts to work on us. Because I know how he is. Sorry, suck. Lord, I know that we're going to go out of here and we're going to have intent on doing the right thing, and he's going to scare us. He's going to say, no, you need that. You need that thing you haven't touched in 5 years. You may need it next week. Or he's going to say, listen, that preacher doesn't know what he's talking about. You never know what's going to happen. You're going to need that extra money. You're going to need all that wealth that you've built up. You need to go ahead and get that bigger storage unit. You're running out of space. You can't hold everything. Lord, protect us from the enemy, from his attacks on our hearts and our minds. And Lord, I pray for the work that you're going to do as some of us begin to shift our focus, as we begin to be a little bit more generous in giving to the poor and helping people. Lord, I pray that you will bless that work. Praise you and thank you. In Jesus' name.